So here we get our first look at the Arvika bike rack. This is the 2-bike version, 7002, and that's the upper hoop. This will be a separate box, but this is part of 7002. Those are the lower trays. This is what they call the BRAF, which is brace A-frame. This is your brace as well. So here are the leg assemblies, and you can see the hardware laid out here. You are given some very long bolts. So these really long bolts, they can be placed either hanging like this, which is probably easier to install, or they could come up the other way too. If you had like a spare tire or something hanging underneath your A-frame tongue, the bolts can face upwards. You are going to have to do some fitting around things like here we can see that there's load control hardware in place. You've got spare batteries, propane tanks. You're going to have to pick your positioning pretty carefully. You can place the tubes, the upwards tubes, either outwards, like you see here, or inwards. And we actually end up switching to inwards a little later. You'll see that. In the case here, we also had a wire that needed to be moved. Once you have the up tubes in place, you do need like a power screwdriver to install these pivoting brackets at the top. Really pretty easy though. There's some self-tappers and they just give you adjustability in the rack. If you tighten them down a little too far, they won't adjust anymore, but you can always just back it off and ever so slightly. Then you've got your hand knobs, and then of course you're going to place your cradle on top of the rack at this point. Everything will kind of swing together. Of course, it's started raining really quite a lot at this point, so we put an awning out to work under, sort of change the lighting here a little bit. Alright, so we had originally installed this base brace on your A-frame of your Arvika bike rack, 7000 series, this one. And we put it to the outside of the A-frame rail. You can see here that the tube is passing down the outside, but that gave us too much width to be able to grab onto the bike rack up top here. So in order to narrow the span, because we needed to be at this position on the A-frame, come over here, you'll find that what we did was we moved the tube to the inside of the A-frame. So instead of hanging out, it's now inboard. We've had to move the trailer weight distribution about an inch forward. This shouldn't be an issue. This is a chain style trailer distribution. An inch one way or the other is sort of, well, it is what it is if we want to get bike racks on here at this point. And you can see there's a little pillow block down here on your main wiring connector for the trailer. That was originally installed right in the middle here, so I've removed that. And we'll just put it back on, but we'll probably put it back on back here, or maybe we'll jump forward a little bit and put it back on back there, because this is just preventing the 7-way from dangling. And that can be easily solved. We want to be careful not to pinch wiring. There's obviously a lot of wiring going on in this area. So there is space behind the bracket, and I do have some of the wires running through it. But what we don't want to do is like really come down hard on any of those, because obviously if you pinch the wire, you create a dead short, and your trailer will do all kinds of things that aren't very trailery. Alright, so with having mounted those the legs, basically spinning them from the outside to the inside of the frame rail, we've now got plenty of space for the adjustments on this. In fact, so with the ability to flip the foot, as well as twist it a little bit on axis to give you adjustment, you really shouldn't have a situation where there's no option to fit your A-frame tongue on your trailer. When you go to install the trays for the bicycle rack on the lower hoop, note that you will have one short set of bolts and then a series of long sets of bolts. These short bolts are for the position closest to the bike rack, where the actual bracket, the folding mechanism, has a plate, and then it doesn't have to drop very far through. The longer sets of bolts are for the nylon C-clips that you're going to slip around the bar, and those nylon clips allow those ones to be moved back and forth. So pressing the end caps onto the lower bicycle trays is a bit of a tricky maneuver. I found the easiest was to put the top of the end cap on first, then sort of get the lower one in orientation, and then stand the whole thing up on end and basically push down into the ground, or down into a table or a bench. Now the Arvika bike racks all have adjustability vertically built into the system. Essentially the uprights are telescopic and can be adjusted up and down and then set in place with a set of sort of hand screws. So the nylon clamps that you use for the lower trays are also used on the upper hoop and the upper, I guess you would call them like the bike frame grabs with very long bolts that pass through them. You'll just sort of clip them around, pass the long bolt through so it hangs, and then the tube and then the actual clamping piece. These are pre-assembled in the box, so you're basically going to do a little disassembly. and then reassembly to get them on. The orientation of that nylon clamp looks like it could be up or down. Might give you some adjustment options for your particular bike. We installed them up because that appears to be what the instructions say, and they seem to work fine for the bikes that we have here. So when you're assembling this, you do this a little bit different than you would normally. Your standard stack on a nut and bolt would be washer, split washer, and then your nut. But here, these are adjustable, and this split washer will carve into this plastic face. So what we're going to do instead, as per the instructions, is we're going to go split washer, washer to protect the face of this. This is already steel, so that's okay. And then we're going to spin this on, just loosely for now, because I have to get this on to the actual power jack in a second. If you have chosen a model of the Arvika bike rack that handles either 3 bikes or more, or you're planning on putting e-bikes on the bike rack, you will also have a recommended brace. Strongly recommended. If you have a analog jack, manual jack, that'll be a single brace. If you have an electric jack, because the motor's on the top and it can't go straight up, you will end up with 2 braces going left and right of the lower hoop, holding the bike weight. When you're installing those braces, you're going to want to make sure that you don't pinch off your electric power cable for your jack, or that they are sort of out of the way of the handle, keeping in mind that your jack handle can be rotated and then flipped and then rotated if you're using a manual handle, which is probably the easiest way to do it. If you're using the dual brace system required by a power jack, you are going to end up with an extra set of clamps. You do not have to use both sets of clamps. In fact, I'd recommend against it, just given the real estate available. So you'll use one set of clamps, and then you're going to put a brace on either side of it. Installing a bike onto the Arvika bike rack is reasonably easy, but it is a little bit of a lift. I would recommend that you kneel your trailer using the power jack or the manual jack, and probably disconnect your truck before you try to lift the bike rack or the bike up there. With the exception of the rearmost cradle, the rest of the bike trays are adjustable. I found the easiest way to find positions was actually to load a bike on them and then slide them around until the bike looks straight and then tighten them up. At the rear of the bike rack, you're going to find 2 spring clip pins. I call these tractor pins because they look like the pins off a 3-point hitch. To keep your bike from hopping out of the lower trays, Arvika provides cam lock buckles, 1 for each tire, so 1 in the front, 1 in the back, and that is going to basically keep it from hopping when you hit a bump on the road, and it will also keep it from being able to roll back and forth. So depending on what your camper might have on the front, if you got a pop-out or windows that you want to look out, or you need to access your propane tanks, the 7000 series rack actually has a few ways that it can fold out of the way. This would be your fold down position. Pull 2 pins, I'll show you where these go. Obviously it drops the rear hoop that supports your bike, and that's how that essentially works. And you put your pins in through here to lock it in its top upward position when you're getting ready to load it with bikes. And it's pretty easy to do. Put the little springy thing over the end. Same thing on this side. Springy. Now it's locked up. Alright, so if you've chosen to have your 7000 series bike rack rigged for either e-bikes or you're carrying 3 or more bikes, it's going to have a brace on the front. These are braces. You'll get 2 if you got an electric jack. If you have a manual jack, there'll be a single brace somewhere in the middle, essentially supporting this from a second angle from the back. To fold it, say you want to get propane into these tanks, or you need some sort of access to the front of your trailer if you've got a storage box up here, what you're going to want to do is essentially pick a side to release. So for us to release both, it makes sense for me to go down here, take off the little hand nut that's there, pull out carriage bolt on one side, and then just swing these away. And then I can just lift up on the front here, and these will kind of come back. Now if I'm just quickly accessing something, pop in the front, I might just hold this here. Because of the weight of these braces, if it's going to stay here for a while, like say you're going to undo your propane tanks and you don't want to get clocked in the head with one of these things, gentlemen can get your tanks off. You might want to just flip it backwards to sort of hang out up there, and then it's not going to have that counterweight pushing it down. And that's about it. When you're done with your project, drop the bike rack back into place, swing all the arms back down, bring your brace system back in. Make sure you don't pinch off the wire on your electric jack, that's important. Put the bolt back in place. These are carriage bolts, so you don't need a wrench for them or anything. They're retained by the square hole that's on the back of the bracket. Now we've reestablished that third point of contact. We're solid, ready to carry bikes again.
And what if you want to remove the whole rack?
Well, if you want to remove the entire rack, you're going to do much the same thing. You're going to pull one of these hand nuts down here. These will hang, and then there's the same thing back here on your A-frame braces for the bike rack. Once you've loosened these off, then you can slide the whole works straight up and out of the vertical tubes that are here, and you're good to go. Well, that about sums up everything we know about the Arvika bike rack up to this point. If you're enjoying the content that you've been seeing here, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, all the products are available on modularracks.com. We'll see you there.